All right, everybody, hello. Welcome back to part 2 of the climate change series. In this video, we're going to talk all about the natural cycles that actually keep our greenhouse gases in balance. And then subsequently, how those cycles have changed over time to create kind of the sticky situation that we're in today. So stick around. It's the Natural Leaders Project Home Eco Challenge. The beauty of nature. So today we're talking about natural cycles. Now, natural cycles create balance in the ecosystem, and this is especially true for the natural cycles and systems that help keep atmospheric gases in balance. I'll tell you, that Mother Nature, she knows what's up. One of these cycles is called the carbon cycle. Now, the carbon cycle is how nature recycles carbon, which is super important because here on Earth, life is carbon-based. So carbon is recycled in a few ways depending on its source. For example, when we die, the carbon in our bodies goes into the earth and is recycled through the food web. We also breathe as part of that carbon cycle. So we breathe in oxygen from the air and we breathe out carbon dioxide. Now, that carbon dioxide doesn't just build up in the atmosphere forever because, of course, things like plants take in our carbon dioxide and produce oxygen, which is what we then breathe. So you see, plants and animals need each other, and it's our relationship that also actually keeps the gases in our atmosphere in balance. Aww. Oh, so sweet. Now, this is because plants act as what we call carbon sinks, which means they literally pull carbon out of the atmosphere and then use some of it for photosynthesis and then send any extra carbon to their roots where it becomes stored in the ground. Here in the grasslands, actually, a large amount of carbon is stored in plant roots. Native prairie plants typically have really deep, extensive root systems, which makes them perfect for storing lots of carbon. The trick is not to dig up the ground too much and release that carbon back into the atmosphere. And that's what happens a lot when we develop land. So life on this planet has changed dramatically in a very, very short period of time, just a couple hundred years. So we're going to draw two pictures. This first kind of image that we're drawing is what this place looked like, 1,000 years ago. Of course, there are people here, but the entire landscape and the lifestyle in this location was drastically different. So this is what all of Blackfoot territory looked like a few hundred years ago. So people lived nomadically here in the grasslands, which meant they moved from place to place, following animals that they hunted. This is a very sustainable lifestyle because instead of stripping all of the resources out of one place, people moved around and let life kind of return to a place before they came back and collected more resources. So at this time, the ecosystem was abundant and super lush because people were integrated into the natural systems of this place instead of fighting against them. So in this system, dead things were recycled. There's no waste as we know it today. And there were ample plants around to act as carbon sinks, keeping that carbon cycle in balance. It's all about balance, baby. Right, so let's cut to a few hundred years later. Over in Europe in the 1750s, something earth-shattering happened that changed this planet forever. We call this period the Industrial Revolution, or Industrial Revolution, which was an era of industrialization. So the creation of modern machines and mechanized production meant that things were being built in these assembly line style factories. This meant you could make tons and tons of stuff in a very short period of time. So in order to keep these factories full, however, European countries needed more resources, things like wood and metal and coal and stuff like that, to keep these factories, producing as much as possible. So people traveled all over the world, colonizing lands and taking the resource of these places and killing anyone who challenged them, basically. But to them, they thought it was worth it to have stuff to fill their factories. The point is, how we use land across this entire planet has changed a ton. And spoiler alert, we're out of balance. So, what does the land look like here in Blackfoot territory today? Well, more than 57% of Alberta's grasslands have been forever altered. We've removed the native prairie plants and replaced a significant amount of them with other plants like agricultural crops and turf grasses, or field grass, which aren't as efficient at sinking carbon. So, in addition to removing the plants, we've also begun covering the ground in hardscape surfaces, so things like roads and parking lots. We now add way more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere as well. So it's not just that we're changing the land. Now our choices, our technologies, our decisions are also increasing the amount of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that we're putting into the atmosphere. So this comes in the form of things like when we heat or cool a house or a building, the transportation that we drive around, overconsumption of consumer goods, which is actually has a huge impact on greenhouse gases, because not only do we have to produce these millions and trillions and bazillions of things, but we also have to transport them all over the planet. The point is, we're producing way more greenhouse gases than we have in the past. Now, this increase wouldn't necessarily be a problem, but we've removed all of the plants that help keep it all in balance. So look at this picture. How many plants are left to make up for all the extra carbon that we're producing? Keep in mind, agriculture and Kentucky bluegrass, which is what most lawns and parks are made of, are not very effective carbon sinks. It definitely makes you think. So what does this all mean? So far in this video, we've talked about the fact that we have removed a huge amount of our carbon sinks across this planet. That means we've gotten rid of a lot of the native plant species that help to clean the air and keep that atmospheric gas in balance, those natural cycles. On top of that, our kind of new lifestyle and land use has meant that we are producing huge amounts of greenhouse gases. So now the whole system's out of whack, because not only do we have more greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, but we've actually removed the things that clean that out. Now, of course, this equation is oversimplified. It is more complicated than this, but I like this equation as a way of showing people that our actions and the things that we do actually do have a huge impact on climate change. So how do you reverse this? What do we do about climate change? Well, let's flip those arrows around. How can we decrease greenhouse gas emissions in our atmosphere, and how can we boost up the number of carbon sinks that are actually helping to process and clean that air? These are very achievable solutions. And so that's what our next challenge is all about. All right, you guys, so for your second challenge, I want you to brainstorm. I want you to come up with a list of as many ways as you can think of to decrease your greenhouse gas emissions as a family or as a group. And how can you increase your carbon sinks? How can you have as much green space around you? Or how can you promote as much of a healthy kind of plant ecosystem as possible? So really your challenge for today is just to come up with a list of things that you and your people can do to decrease carbon emissions and increase carbon sinks and green infrastructure. So in this video, you guys, we looked at how the land has actually changed over the last couple of hundred years. How have human choices and human actions in terms of land use and in terms of industry actually impacted the natural cycles that usually would keep our atmospheric gases in balance? So for the next video, we're actually going to look at what you can do and what I can do to start mitigating and adapting to, well, the new world, this amazing world that we're living in now. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. That was like projectile spit. That was so unhealthy and so unsafe.
You're speaking moistly.
Justin, I'm sorry, baby.